Hey folks, I am soaking my feet to make the tingling zapping sensation go away, and I am trying to just get my brain to function for me because it's 4 a.m. in the morning and the cat's sitting next to me acting all weird, so I'm looking at him. I'm just trying to hold my head together because I'm a little loopy at this point in time, and so I'm going to hopefully make a good video and share that with you guys because I'm sure as hell not getting any sleep tonight. Yeah, I'm okay. Yeah. Alright. So one of the things I was thinking about, I've been thinking, like, I have a list of things I want to make videos on, and it's hard to when it's 4 in the morning, it's really hard to think and make like a coherent list of thoughts in order to make a video. So it's like, oh, I have all these ideas. What can I actually talk about that I'm not going to babble on endlessly about? Oh, okay. Somebody was talking with me the other day. They were disagreeing with me, but they had a lot of statistics, they had a lot of research, and I really appreciated that because it kind of helps me to broaden my understanding, because there's so much going on in the trans community. There's so many opposing views, and I think one of the reasons there are so many opposing views is because there are so many very different types of people who are, being classified as trans. And so, like, it's extremely easy to end up with a lot of conflicting data. And so I'm trying to like pull all that data together. And I was trying to draw a picture of that with words. And I remember hearing this story. It was a long time ago, and I should have like researched it before I did this video. But it is 4 in the morning, so there's that. And it was about like all these blind men who walk up to an elephant, and one of them is touching the tail of the elephant and he's saying, oh, this is a rope. And one of them is touching the ear of the elephant and he's like, oh, this is a sheet of leather. And one of them is touching the trunk of the elephant. It just goes on. Like, they're touching different pieces of the elephant, and they're each coming to different conclusions about what the thing they're touching is, because they only have that very, very narrow individual perspective, and they're blind, so that's all they can see is what's directly in front of them with their hands. And I feel like that is a perfect description of what is going on in the trans community at this time, because I was listening to a butch lesbian detransitioner, and she had this fantastic video. I want to do a reaction video to her video, but I'm not doing it at 4 a.m. in the morning when I can't think clearly. But she had this amazing video, and it was so different than anything I've even thought about, because I'm bisexual, I'm not gay. I grew up in a really accepting, tolerant gay community when I was in high school, where it was like, yeah, if you want to hang out with us, you can hang out with us, because we're all going to the same high school anyway, and there's not that many people in the town anyway. And so I just hung out with them, and then, I developed a crush on one of the girls, and it was like, I kind of had some realizations and discoveries to make there. So, I came out as bisexual, and, that was cool. I was still me. Nobody really made much fuss about it, and it was just kind of no big deal. And so that was awesome. Had a wonderful experience in high school. Got out of high school, started working at bars in my hometown, and the lesbian community in my hometown was really cliquish. Kind of some of the more prominent members of that community were like Gold Star lesbians, and they made it very, very clear to me that since my genitalia had been touched by a man, they had no interest in touching it themselves. So they were like Gold Star plus Gold Star by extension. It's like, oh, I'm only ever going to have sex with women who are lesbians, because I have no interest in women who have, a bisexual history. And so I just, at that point, like, the lesbians all just kind of didn't want to have anything to do with me because I was bisexual. And I think at that point in time in our culture in America, maybe just in that part of the country, I don't know, but at that point in time, everybody just assumed you were a poser, and if you're bisexual, then you're really just doing it for attention, especially as a woman. You're really just doing it for attention because women just want attention, and this has just been a big ploy to get attention. And I mean, I can kind of understand how they're looking at it saying, well, I don't want to be your science experiment, so, go find someone else. But, then I ended up being other women's science experiment because the other women who were interested in me were, bisexual in the, air quotes kind of way, where it was like, I remember the first girl I was with, we spent the night together, and the next morning she spent like the entire morning on the phone calling up various relatives and letting them all know that she had a girlfriend now, and basically just trying to rile up as much drama as she could. And then like she had no interest in me after that. Like once she had established I have a girlfriend, see, I really am bisexual, she didn't want to have a single goddamn thing to do with me. And I was kind of like, all right, well, except she wanted my money and she wanted to use my car like for carpool services. It was just like, yeah, I wasn't too impressed by her. But yeah, that was kind of my experience of dating women. So when I look at the gay community, there's this part of me that just automatically goes, well, I'm not really gay, I'm just bisexual. Because I was not welcome. I was not welcome at all in the gay community. Like after high school, which was a really awesome experience, and I knew a lot of really awesome gay people who were really, really warm and welcoming and inclusive, and they didn't care if I was bisexual, they didn't care if I was just that weird kid who hung out with them at lunch. It didn't matter. They were just cool people. But once I got out into like the greater, world, it was made very, very abundantly clear to me that I wasn't welcome in the gay community. So I just, I didn't have anything to do with lesbians. Like that was pretty much it. It was like, okay, I mean, and I met some really beautiful lesbians that I would have loved to have had a relationship with, but it was kind of like, I'm not going to make the first move because I've seen how that goes. And, why would I hit on women when I have entire clubs full of men who all want to sleep with me and I can just pick and choose from them because they're not shy about it, So that was kind of that. Like I didn't have much experience with women, and I just don't feel like I'm part of the gay community. So there's that. But this woman making the video, she was gay, and just totally different perspective. Because like she's kind of, if you want to use the Blanchard model, which I'm not even sure the Blanchard model is the best model, but it's the model that I saw that had the most kind of scientific thought behind it. And I see a lot of models now, like the queer theory is not scientific. I'm sorry. There's nothing about queer theory that seems remotely scientific. It's like, we're just gonna put more and more labels out there into the world, and it's all just kind of how you feel and what you want, and what anything goes. And it's like, this is not remotely concrete, and I can't use queer theory to communicate with other people because nothing about it is particularly communicable when it comes to, any kind of a meaningful dialogue, because every word lacks a definition. And if none of your words have definitions, then you're not really using a language. And so you're not communicating anything. And so queer theory is, just from a linguistic standpoint, queer theory is completely useless from, when it comes to anything more than an application. So queer theory, the theoretical world is interesting and all, but when you try to apply theory to real life, like when you actually try to apply theory to practice, it doesn't always line up properly. That's very painfully evident when you try to use it linguistically. What is non-binary? If I use non-binary in a sentence, how can I be sure that I'm saying the same thing as the person I'm talking to is hearing? I can't. What is gender fluid? When I talk with someone about something gender fluid, are they picturing in their head the same thing that I'm trying to express to them with my words? Queer theory falls apart immediately, just from a linguistic standpoint. And that's not even talking about a scientific standpoint, a research standpoint, any of it. It all falls apart. So I go back to the Blanchard model, and it's like, okay, well, it ain't perfect, but it's what we got. So if you go to the Blanchard model, this gal who was making this video, she's, I guess, what they would call HSTS. They need to find better words for this. Like, these are outdated words. They just don't sound right in today's sensibilities. But, you know, again, it's old, it's rickety, it's what we've got. But she's what they would call like a homosexual transsexual, where she was a very butch lesbian and she transitioned for a while, or at least she tried to transition for a while, because, you know, she just didn't fit into the feminine framework particularly well. And then she ended up detransitioning and kind of re-embracing her identity as a butch lesbian. Amazing video, amazing thought put into it. She talks about the homophobic aspects of the trans community, of queer theory, of transitioning, and it's like, I was vaguely aware of that. I kind of sort of knew what was going on, but I wasn't thinking about it because, again, I'm not gay. I'm not part of the gay community. I'm just bisexual. So, you know, for me, I'm approaching all this from the AGP, autogynephile kind of point of view, where it's like, okay, this is where I'm standing. This is where I'm seeing. This is the part of the elephant that I'm looking at. You know, for me, I'm doing a lot of soul searching that doesn't have much to do with my sexuality, even though autoandrophilia is supposedly based in your sexuality. I'm trying to understand how I got to be this way, and I'm trying to understand what drives me in this direction. And when I do, like, just deep introspective thinking, just kind of, you know, I'll be washing dishes or doing, you know, folding laundry for my family or whatever, and my mind just sort of wanders, because that's what it does while I'm doing boring, repetitive tasks. And I'll be thinking to myself, you know, what makes me drawn toward masculinity? What makes me drawn toward all these things? And it's almost never sex. It's almost never sexual for me. And so it's like, okay, I understand there is a sexual element to this, and I'm not going to deny that there's a sexual element to this, but how much of this is rooted in sex, and how much of this is something else? And so it's like, okay, so say I don't know anything. Say I'm completely blank, and I have no knowledge or understanding of what's going on. And I just, you know, blurted out what I thought was going on. You know, just blindly. The first thing that comes to mind for me is, okay, I had a rough childhood, which has affected me. I know it's affected me. I don't know how much it's affected me. God, it would be great if I could find a good therapist who would be able to help me with that. But yeah, no, I'm not going to try that again. I'm not that stupid. What is it? Insanity is doing the same thing again and again and hoping for different results. I know that's not the actual functioning definition of insanity, but still, it's a funny joke because it's true. And so I'm not going to try to go therapy, but you know, I know that I'm affected by the way I grew up. And I was watching this thing on CPTSD because, again, I don't sleep at night anymore, so I'm watching documentary after documentary because what else am I going to do? And I was watching this thing on CPTSD, and it was just like, it was some therapist. She's honestly really good. I should probably like talk about some of her stuff that she's posted, because she has these quick little like TikTok sized little snippet videos, and they're informational, and you know, she packs in a decent amount of information into a very, very short video, which is something I admire because I have no talent for it. And she was talking about CPTSD, and she was talking about it in the more classic sense that a lot of people encounter it when they talk about childhood CPTSD. So you have neglectful parents, dismissive parents, narcissistic parents, basically mean parents, and you end up growing up with this understanding that the world around you just isn't safe. And that's what a lot of people call CPTSD. And when I was originally researching CPTSD, which, by the way, in case you haven't watched a bunch of my other videos, CPTSD is complex post-traumatic stress disorder. The description that is typically given to give people an idea of what CPTSD is, PTSD is a car accident, like a really grisly car accident that just traumatizes somebody and gives them, what we all understand is PTSD. Complex PTSD is a trauma that happened so often and so repetitively over a period of months or even years that it became that person's world. And so the person who's been exposed to this trauma, it's not just like a car accident where it hits you out of the blue and it was traumatizing and you can kind of go back to a single pinpoint in time and say that's what caused it. For complex PTSD, it's a long, drawn-out process where the individual experiencing the trauma, they acclimate to it. It becomes their understanding of the world. So the example that is most frequently given is somebody who was in a concentration camp where horrible things are happening every single day, and you're basically just being re-traumatized again and again and again throughout the day for months or even years. And then when you get out of that environment, your entire understanding of the world has altered dramatically. So it's not just one car crash or one violent assault or one thing that you can go back and say that was the thing that did it. It's so much and so cumulative that eventually your understanding of the world has shifted. And so when they, that makes sense to people. They hear about that, they're like, okay, that makes sense. So concentration camp, really extreme situations, really bad situations, that's complex PTSD. And I think the reason that complex PTSD didn't catch on the way that it should, at least not in America, it's not in the DSM right now. The reason it didn't catch on the way it should have, perhaps, is because people sort of broadened out that definition and said, well, complex PTSD is kids who have narcissistic or dismissive parents who aren't nice to them. And so it's like, okay, that broadens the definition exponentially. There's a thing called the ACE score, if you really want to get into it. And honestly, just about everybody falls into that. Now, and it's really easy for a layperson who doesn't really do much research on it to say, well, I have a few points on the ACE score, so I must be traumatized, without realizing that there are other factors that interact with a child that can really dampen the negative effects of those ACE scores. So, for example, if a child has a really strong support network, maybe they did lose a parent to, a sudden aneurysm, whatever. And it was really traumatizing for them, and it made their life really rocky and upsetting because, it disrupts the flow and the harmony of a child's developmental years when a parent just kind of disappears. But they had a really strong support network, and they had grandparents who were there every day taking care of them, and they were able to really, they were bolstered and protected and basically insulated from these negative things that happened. So ACE scores by themselves are not as simple as people would like to think they are. However, that's its own can of worms. The thing is, a lot of people, when they talk about complex PTSD, when I see people online in forums talking about complex PTSD, they're really talking about, my parents weren't nice to me. My parents said mean things to me growing up. My parents were disrespectful toward me. And I don't know how I feel about that. Because some of these people, you get into the weeds with their story, and it's like, holy shit, your mom did that to you? Okay. Are you okay? Are you gonna be all right? And then some people, it's like you hear that baseline, oh yeah, my mom was just so dismissive and so rude, and she'd get angry, and it was like, yeah, so now you have PTSD because your mom was grumpy all the time? Like, okay, I guess. it seems a little bit snowflakey, but all right, well, I guess, maybe I'm not seeing the whole picture. Maybe that's what's going on, or maybe we've just broadened the definition of complex PTSD out so much that anybody who had any kind of negative experiences in their childhood and suddenly feels like they've been traumatized and now they're, permanently damaged by this horrible trauma that they endured. When people are like, oh, well, everybody benefits from therapy, number one, I do not benefit from therapy. I've tried, believe me. But, most people could do with a little bit of therapy to just kind of help them with that whole introspection process. Because everybody's got a little bit of maintenance that they can do up here to just kind of make things run a little more smoothly. So, if that's what a lot of people want to, apply the label complex PTSD to, that's whatever, I don't really have a strong opinion one way or the other. That's what I see happening a lot of the time. But I feel like the definition has gotten so broad that when you do find someone who's been in one of those concentration camp kinds of situations, we don't have a word that really properly encompasses that situation, because complex PTSD describes everything. And so you can have people, this is a persistent problem in our society. It's exactly the same problem that we see in the trans community. It's not nearly as exaggerated as what we see in the trans community, but it's like, hey, this word is cool, let's just put everything under this label. Which means that you don't really know what you're dealing with when you talk to somebody claiming to have CPTSD. Like, are you do you have some social quirks because your parents were grumpy people and they weren't particularly nice? Or do you have some real, horrible, abusive stuff that happened in your past that has really messed with your ability to function on a day-to-day basis? Because that happens to people. And then I look at my own experience, because, full circle, let's go back to that. As I said, it's 4 a.m. and I'm very, very tired and it's hard to concentrate. Sorry. But, going back to my own situation, because I didn't want to go off on this huge tangent about CPTSD. I say that I was in physical danger on a daily basis because I was in physical danger on a daily basis. Bad things were happening to my physical body, and I didn't have any way to protect myself from them, and that was not good. And I talk about how I nearly died when I was 17. I got hospitalized and then bedridden for an entire week when I was 13 or 14. I can't remember which of those two. It was middle school, so somewhere in middle school. The whole thing was a blur at that point. Middle school was one big long blur of really not fun. And years and years of my life this went on, and I peeled away from my body like tape that doesn't stick properly. And so, I don't know if you would call that complex PTSD. I'm sure a lot of people would be happy to use that term, but the term just feels ill-defined these days because people apply the term to a broad spectrum of experiences, from the extreme and severe to it seems awfully fluffy on the other end. And I don't always feel comfortable with that term because of the fluffy end of the spectrum. I see a lot of woe is me, self-pity, and I don't know if it's legitimate because people are online and they're in a forum where they're trying to discuss these issues and they're just saying, look, I'm a train wreck. Because sometimes it's important to be honest and look at yourself and make an honest assessment of where you're at and be like, look, I need help. I have problems. And sometimes I look at it as we live in this society where mental illness seems to be glamorized, and I wonder how many of these people, sometimes I have those moments where I have that gut reaction of, I'm not sure this person is really struggling the way they think they're struggling. And so then I take that and I apply it to my own life. Okay, when I talk about my childhood, I'm not trying to say that I'm currently struggling with trauma from my childhood. I think I did a really good job of getting over that when I was in my early 20s. Like, I am proud of myself for the things I overcame in my early 20s, because by the time I met my husband, I was moderately stable, and then when I built the relationship with him, that really helped to solidify my sense of stability. Because he and I finally met someone in my life that I could talk to, which really helped. And I feel like I made a really good recovery from the things that happened to me when I was a kid. But then talking about the experiences that I have, it's very difficult to describe them because I don't have good words to describe what happened to me, because a lot of the words that I use, they seem emotional. When I say that I was in agony as a kid, it's really easy to be like, oh, okay, so she was, she was emotionally distraught. And it's like, no, I was in physical agony, because being severely oxygen deprived is a physically agonizing experience. And it's not exactly the same as pain, because most people, they kind of localize pain in their bodies. If you break your leg, what hurts? My leg hurts. It makes sense. There's this logic to it. Pain comes from places. Places in your body get hurt, and those places feel pain. When you're severely oxygen deprived, there isn't necessarily a place that you're feeling pain. Like, yeah, your lungs aren't breathing, and yeah, your chest feels tight, but if you do it every day, if it becomes your world that you live in, and it becomes the framework of your understanding of the universe, then experiencing it's not frightening the way it is for people who are new to the experience of suffocation or unfamiliar with the experience of suffocation. You just have these loud alarm bells ringing in your head. Loud noises, loud noises, screaming noises. It's like you're gonna die. Your brain is telling you, hey idiot, you're gonna die. Try breathing some air. And obviously you can't. And it's agonizing. Like, I remember my skin would tingle because I felt like the air outside was so thick and rich, and it wasn't going into my lungs, but I could feel it on my skin because I was so desperate to breathe that I became just hyper aware of the sensation of air, which if I was drowning, I suppose would be a really useful sensation. It's like, oh, I found oxygen. But it didn't really help when, my lungs were constricted and they weren't breathing, and, the problem was internal instead of external. So when I talk about being in agony, just feeling this agonizing sensation, I think a lot of people interpret that emotionally. And so it's like, okay, so moody much? And it's like, no, you don't understand. Like, this was a physical thing that was going on. And then of course there was the constant fear that it was going to happen again. But the fear stopped being an issue after a while, because with complex trauma, you stop being afraid because it's part of your life. And so I don't know about other people, but for me, I learned not to be afraid anymore, because there was no point in being afraid. It was a useless thing. It was another alarm bell in my head. And there were so many alarm bells going off in my head that you just start to learn to ignore them. It's like, oh, I think something really bad's about to happen to me. Oh well. But the thing that really did not lessen in its intensity was the shame. Whenever I was blamed for what was happening to me, blamed for being weak, blamed for not working hard enough, blamed for not simply being weak, but acting weak, acting fragile, acting like I couldn't do this perfectly ordinary thing that everyone around me could do without any trouble whatsoever. So why was I acting like it was so difficult? If I had to blurt out, just blindly and ignorantly, why I think I want to be a man, consistently, throughout my life, I think growing up, and I'm still doing the thinking through here, I'm still doing the introspection. I'm still letting my thoughts wandering and following them to see where they go. I'm doing all that, but I think in many ways growing up, I was treated like the worst stereotypes of what a woman is. And constantly being told that I needed to be something else. And if you apply that something, if you take an amalgamation of all those things that I was supposed to be that I wasn't, and you write them down on a piece of paper and you describe them, basically what you're describing is a man. The stereotype of a man, the idealized stereotype of a man. And so that was kind of the template that I was given growing up. I was constantly being harshly judged for things that I couldn't control, that typically fall under the feminine classification or category. And I was expected to act in ways that I could only manage to even hope to achieve by acting in ways that typically fall into the stereotypical masculine category. And, you know, you can kind of see that. Like, as I look at it, I can kind of see how, you know, acting weak, acting fragile, being such a, you know, such a wilting violet, being feminine. How dare I be feminine? You know, women have all these emotions. And that's what people thought was happening with me because they couldn't see any physical damage to my body. It's like, oh, you're just being emotional. And I mean, my parents were telling me I was emotional all the time because I'd get upset that I had to go to school because I wonder why. And so it seemed to me like at least that I was this fragile, undisciplined, emotional, you know, person. And none of it was good. And that's what I see so many, especially in the manosphere, that's what I see so many men thinking that that's what a woman is. Oh, women are just emotional. Well, women don't know how to work hard. Women don't know how to discipline themselves. Women don't know how to do things as well as men do. You know, I see so much of that shit. And I talk to so many men who are like, well, women aren't as smart as men. Like, I could make entire YouTube videos about how men don't understand statistics when they say shit like that. Like, men who understand statistics don't say that shit because they understand how statistics work. But the guys who are saying the shit to me, they don't have more than a baseline understanding of what the fuck they're talking about. So they say all this shit and they feel justified in it. And it's like, wow, you ignorant pile of crap. But these are the negative stereotypes of femininity. And so these are the things that I was being told growing up all the time that I was. And all of it was bad. It was always negative. So what was the ideal that I was supposed to be? What was I supposed to be instead of this sad, weak, pathetic little girl? Well, you know, I was supposed to be, obviously, I was supposed to be stronger. I was constantly being told that my symptoms were all in my head, and I had two options. I could either believe my doctors who were telling me every single year, oh, look, your lung capacity is getting worse. Oh, look, your lung capacity is getting worse. Well, at the rate that you're going, like, this is something one of my doctors told me when I was like, I think either 13 or 14. I'm thinking 13. Again, it was middle school, so it was really blurry. But, yeah, he was basically like, yeah, at the rate that your lung capacity is deteriorating, by the time you're 20, you're going to be on oxygen tubes. And, you know, he told me this very, very casually, like, oh yeah, this is bad. But nobody actually his solution wasn't, hey, let's stop exposing you to the thing that's making you sick every single day. His solution was, let's load you up with some more drugs and steroids and see if that doesn't take care of the problem for you. So, I mean, the solution was always drugs. Let's just give you more drugs. Let's pile on more drugs. Let's give you heavier drugs. And I didn't want to take the drugs, so I didn't. Which probably didn't help my situation, but I was really tired of, all the medicine. I mean, I found out about the side effects, and I was like, yeah, I'm not fucking taking this. But, I don't know if that was a good thing or not. I kind of think sometimes that maybe it was. Like, for all I know, my lungs are scarred to shit, but, there is no good solution. So anyway, there were these two versions of reality I had to pick between. I could either believe my teachers who were constantly telling me, oh, it's all in your head, honey. Or I could believe my doctors who were like, yeah, by the time you're 20, you're going to be on oxygen tubes. And it's like, well, I don't want to be on oxygen tubes when I turn 20, so I'm just going to believe my teachers. Kid logic. It's just fantastic shit. And so I told myself it really was all in my head. Like, this is what everybody's telling me day after day after day. It's all in your head. Okay, fine. It's in my head. Then I need to really discipline my thinking. And I need to control this shit. And I need to dictate to my body what it's going to do and when it's going to do it. And so I focused on that. That was what I learned in middle school, My husband, he's very sweet. It's a very playful kind of teasing, but he teases me about how I don't know geography. And I don't know geography because we learned about geography in middle school. And I remember by the time I got to that particular class, I remember the classroom very, very clearly, and I remember sitting in it and being so exhausted by everything that had happened to me earlier in the day that I just I sat, and the teacher talked, and I just heard noise, and I didn't learn anything. I didn't learn anything in that class at all. And so every once in a while, my husband, because he's kind of a history buff, and so he loves studying, all these different parts of the world and history and all this wonderful stuff. And so he'll be like, hey, do you know which one of these countries, do you know what this country is? He'll show me a shape, and I'll be like, I don't know. And then I'll just kind of throw it. I'll be like, it's France. I know it's not France, but it was like, it's France. It's somewhere in Scandinavia, so it's definitely not France. But I'm like, it's France. Because I don't know. I just don't. I never learned. I never learned. But what I did learn in middle school really, really well was how to push yourself past your limits. Whatever your limit is, whatever you think you can't do, you hit that wall, and then you just keep on pushing. And then you hit a new wall and you keep on pushing, and then you hit a new wall and you keep on pushing. And by the time I was 17, I pushed right up until my body collapsed and I stopped breathing. And then I was lying on the floor, not breathing, and thinking, okay, new wall. Let's see if we can't get you to breathe. I'm going to die either way. I might as well play with it, I might as well try. It gives me something to do while I wait to suffocate to death. Disregarding genitalia. Is that a masculine or a feminine trait? To lie on the ground, dying, and very impartially and very calmly say, I don't like this, and so I'm going to do something to pass the time. I'm going to fight for my life, not because I think I can win, and not because I'm particularly partial to the end results in either direction, but because it will pass the time while I go through the process of dying. And dying is unpleasant, so this gives me something to do. I don't know if it's particularly masculine or feminine at that point. I think it's mostly just sociopathic. But again, this was survival. This was the world I lived in. This was the world I knew. This was all I knew. I don't know how to be a normal person. I don't know what normal is. I didn't get to be normal or have normal. And I mean, that's just talking about the physical issues. That's not talking about the social issues that came with them. As you grow up, especially growing up the way I did, you form this internal picture of who you are. And maybe not just who you are, but who you want to be, who you aspire to be, what you're working toward. I think everybody kind of does that. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think everybody kind of has this internal idea of who they think they are or how they think they are. And that internal sense of who you are can get kind of warped from a variety of different things. If you have parents who are hypercritical while you're growing up, like low self-esteem is a thing. And so I think different people have, like, everybody, let's say that this is the way it works. Let's say every person has an internal image of who they are. And I think that actually is a psychological concept, because I remember my clinical psychologist father mentioning it one time when I was a kid. But I didn't research it or read into it too much. But I do remember him talking about it one day, just kind of randomly. But let's say that everybody does have, in my very, very inexpert layperson's interpretation of reality, let's say everyone does have an internal image of who they are inside their head. And this internal image can be, warped or distorted in any number of ways. If they're narcissistic, they have kind of a double image, honestly, because I knew a narcissistic guy. It was really fascinating. But they have the super low self-esteem, the super insecurity, all these dark crawling worms under the surface, but they have this beautiful golden veneer. And the person that they want to see themselves as, and the person they strive to hold together, the image they try to hold in their head, is perfection. Just the most awesome, amazing version of themselves they could possibly be. And then they try to project that out of the world, and they try to see themselves as that person. And they work so hard to maintain this image of perfection, and no human is perfect, so it's clearly not a realistic image. They work so hard to maintain that they are willing to completely ignore reality when it conflicts with the image of themselves inside their head. And I looked that up. That's called narcissistic amnesia. It's a really cool concept because I've seen it in people. I've seen it multiple times, and it's always kind of a mind fuck when it happens. It's like, oh, I didn't say that. I didn't do that. And you're sitting there looking at them, and it's like, I was standing right there. I saw you do it. I wouldn't do something like that. Yeah, but I just saw you do that. So what? Well, your memory is faulty. My memory is faulty. I just saw you do that. I've had situations where somebody will say something and I'll write it down right after they say it. So it's fresh in my memory. This is the words you used. I wrote it down. I never said that. I wrote it down when you said it. I wrote it down on the day that you said it because it was so extraordinarily stupid that I had to write it down because you would never believe me. Well, I never said anything like that. You must have misheard me. How could I mishear you? You were standing right next to me. Doesn't matter. Internal image, really, really not aligning with reality. But then there's low self-esteem too, where someone gets picked at and pecked at and picked at and pecked at until they see this image of themselves inside, and the image is this sad, weak little worm of a person who doesn't really do anything right now, do they? And they don't see how beautiful they are. And I'm just talking physical beauty. They don't see how kind they are. They don't see how hardworking they are. They don't see their accomplishments. They don't see their achievements. People like to call that low self-esteem. I think it's a grab bag of all sorts of different problems that people develop over time, because I think that a lot of different things can really chip away at and warp this image that we all have inside our head of who we are. I'm actually getting to a point with all this. Please just bear with me. It is 5 a.m. in the morning at this point. My alarm's going to go off any minute. So, nobody has a perfectly accurate image inside their head. Everybody's a little bit twisted, a little bit skewed, a little bit warped, a little bit not quite right. Nobody has the vision of other people to supplement their own personal experience. And other people around you are going to see a side of you that you yourself never get to see. And that's something that's really wonderful about being socially connected to other people. They can kind of give you a lot of feedback if you're close with them. So, for example, me and my husband, he's given me some just incredible feedback about the way I act, the way I think, via the things I say. I have another friend, she kind of, we were talking one day and she mentioned something to me about the things I was saying. And I was like, I never thought about it that way, but you're probably onto something. Nobody has a perfectly accurate vision of who they are inside their head. Nobody has a perfectly accurate picture. And I think that as I was growing up, the picture that I formed of who I am, who I wanted to be, who I aspired to be, who I needed to be in order to stay alive, because in the world that I lived in the circumstances that I grew up in, staying alive was a challenge and a priority. I couldn't just be like, oh, well, I don't have to worry about that, I'm going to be fine. No, I could have died. And so I had to work hard to stay alive. It wasn't easy. It wasn't something that just came naturally to me. I'm here in many ways through the gift of God and through sheer fucking force of will. I think that image, throughout years of development, became warped. And I do think warped is the right word. People like to use this word warped as in, oh, they're warped and sick and usually perverted, and they apply this disgust to it. I don't find anything disgusting about the way I am. I have no natural disgust for it. Perhaps I just have a stronger stomach than most people, but the way I am, I look at it, it's like, well, this is a very natural reaction to the environment that I grew up in. People can look at me and say, well, she's kind of crazy. And yeah, for a normal person in the normal world, I'm a little bit loopy. I'm eccentric. I'm not crazy, but I'm eccentric. But for a person who grew up in the environment that I grew up in, I am perfectly sane. I'm extremely well adapted. You try living in that environment under those circumstances. This is how you do it well. But what is that image? And I think over the years, as time passed, and I was constantly given this reinforcement, you need to be stronger. You need to be more independent. You need to be less emotional. You need to be all these things. And if you write all those things down, and I probably should take the time to write them down, but I say them as they come to mind. Oh, what was that thing? Oh yeah, I needed to be independent too. I needed to be this. I needed to be that. They all fit into a masculine stereotype. And so over the years, the picture in my head that I drew as I was growing and developing and coming to an understanding of who I am as a person, because as kids grow, they develop an understanding of who they are and build up an understanding of who they are. Mine didn't grow up in a nice straight line the way most people do. Mine got warped and twisted and bent. And I think that the end result was, a biological female who looked at it and said, well, in order to be a good student, a good daughter, an acceptable person in society, and someone who is worthy of being loved, I need to be a man. And so I was, as much as I possibly could be. When I was having the tomboy conversations with my husband before the trans issue came up, I was kind of looking at it as like, I'm not transgender. I'm just a tomboy, I'm just a tomboy, that's all. And he was like, yeah, you're not transgender. You just one day out of the blue, he was like, you took all the best things about being a man and you applied them to yourself. Where I clearly wasn't a man. I'd never been a man. I'll never be a man. But I had taken all these concepts and ideas about what a man is, and I had tried to incorporate them into my life as much as possible. And, I can't be a man, but I'd look at all the idealized images that men project out into the world about what they want to be and what they perceive themselves as, and I tried to scoop as many of them up as I could and put them into the person that I am and the person that I live from day to day. Because a person is, in many ways, who they are is just the person they choose to be as they grow throughout their days, And he told me that, and it was like one of the most beautiful things that he could have said to me. And he just sort of said it very offhand because, we were talking. Have I mentioned that the pregnancy hormones make me quite weepy? I don't want to be a man. I don't want to have a beard. I don't want to have testicles. I think they would be quite inconvenient. I don't necessarily want to do any of the surgeries. I think those don't actually work, and I don't think they would give me anything that I particularly want. I want to be a man. And I will not ever be male. But if I can, in my life, in my day-to-day actions, take those ideals that were, always in front of me and always just out of reach, and try to live them as much as I can, that's what I want. That's what I want. And to be told that in some capacity or another I had done that was just so beautiful and so touching. I think that given the upbringing that I was given, there is a very, very deep-rooted part of me that concluded, and I think this happens with a lot of people who are trans, and I think this happens with a lot of people who are, homosexual, transsexual, not just autogynephiles and autoandrophiles. I think many of us, and I mean, someone tell me I'm wrong in the comments section, because I know I know that a lot of you guys are more well-researched than I am, including, especially that one lady who messaged me just recently. I felt so bad because it's she clearly, just statistic after statistic, she knew her shit, and I was like, okay. I'm still learning, but I think that many of us, many of us, we want to be the other sex, the other gender, because inside, on a very, very fundamental level, on a very, very deep, deep, deep part of ourselves, we believe that being that other, for me being a man, would finally make me worthy of love and acceptance. And I want that because every human being wants that. When I talk about being warped and I talk about being twisted by my growing up, you would think that it would be a very simple process to undo that, And in some ways it is. When you come to an understanding of what's going on inside your head, it's a lot easier to look at it and say, okay, so when I have these feelings, when I have these thoughts, what's really going on here? What am I really thinking? What's the layer underneath what I'm feeling? But you can't make the thoughts go away. You can't make the feelings go away, because even decades after the trauma, even decades after the experiences that I've described to you, I'm good. I'm a lot better. I'm not going through my days feeling the weight of the suffering that I experienced as a child. I'm not entirely sure that CPTSD is a term that applies to me, because I'm pretty good. I'm okay, I got some interpersonal issues. I'm socially awkward as fuck. I'm working on it. I have trust issues. That's probably from my childhood. You can call it CPTSD or you can call it something else. I have a lot of trust issues. I'm working on that. I'm trying to build friendships and maintain them, even though I'm really not good at it. I'm very, very bad at maintaining friendships. I just kind of, when I was an exotic dancer, like before I met my husband, I just wandered around the world ghosting on people. Like I didn't have a friend for more than a day for most of the time. Like I had a few people that I got to know over time, but even then, let's keep a separation there. Gotta stay safe. And so, I'm trying to build friendships with people, and it's hard because I'm not good at it. But, every day a person learns and grows, and this is my learning and growing process. I don't feel like I'm traumatized, I don't feel like, obviously those are scars, and I need to work to soften and smooth them out. But, when people talk about trauma, they talk about like reliving the experiences. And I had a period for a few years where I did relive those experiences again and again. And I would just lie in bed for hours just reliving it, I don't do that anymore. That stopped when I was in my early 20s and I started, honestly, when I started exotic dancing. A lot of the really, really bad stuff I got rid of. I managed to shake that stuff off. I managed to untangle a lot of the mess in my head. I managed to kind of clean my life up after everything I went through. So I wouldn't say that I'm traumatized right now. I don't feel trauma. Like I went to a place that definitely reminded me of the things that happened to me when I was a kid, and I don't like it. I don't like that place. And every time I look at it, it reminds me, because it looks, same kind of place. And I looked at it, was like, you know what? It's ugly. This is ugly to me. I see this place and all I see is ugly. But it's not going to hurt me. I'm not afraid of it. I can spend hours out here. It's not going to hurt me. It's not going to bother me. It's an ugly place. I think it's an eyesore, but I'm not feeling bad about it, So I think I'm recovered. When I talk about the warping and the twisting, what I think is a good way to describe it, a good way to get the idea across is, people do beautiful things with trees. And I think when I talk about humans, when I talk about people, sometimes the best way to describe them is being like trees, because people grow and develop, and as they grow and develop, they kind of solidify. They become more set in their ways and less fluid. Like the young branches of a tree, the youngest branches, they're always kind of bendy and flexible and pliable, and you can move them around all over the place. But as they get older, as they get more set in their ways, the wood hardens up, and you can do things to a tree. It's not just growing up in a straight line, undisturbed. Some trees are, but some trees, people like to do artistic things with them. Like sometimes they'll braid trees. I'll try to find a good picture of a braided tree for you guys. There was one tree in this park where we live, beautiful tree. Somebody twisted it as it grew, and so the tree had this lovely spiral pattern in its bark, and it was clearly not natural. It was too symmetrical. It was clearly unnatural, but the tree was so beautiful that every time we passed it on the path, I'd always stop and look at it. It was warped. It was twisted. It was literally twisted. Just because something is warped and twisted, that doesn't make it ugly. It makes it different. What a person does with their life, what a person builds of their life, that can either be beautiful or it can be ugly. That's a choice that a person makes. Being shaped by violent circumstances as you grow up doesn't guarantee that you're going to be ugly, but you do become hardened and set in your ways. You can't unbraid a tree. You can't untwist the tree at the park that I walk in. I'd love it if people were so pliable, where you can just go in and, give them a nice little pat on the shoulder and say, hey, you don't have to think this about yourself anymore. But it doesn't always work like that, because as a person grows and as they develop and as they become who they are and they become set in their understanding of themselves, those little teeny twists and curves that were made on their once pliable soul, they become solidified. And so just because you understand maybe why you feel some of these feelings, like transgender feelings, just because you understand it, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can make those feelings go away. They're always going to kind of be there. And I think that's okay. This tree is not ugly. It's just different. It's been changed. It's been altered. But it can still be very beautiful. I think I'm getting very tired. I am going to call that it for this video. I rambled on far too much. I'll try to edit it down so it's not quite so long. I probably need to make some food. Number one, because I need to eat because I haven't slept. And number two, I might make something for breakfast for the kids and they might like that. And hopefully I can catch a nap today because I have not slept tonight at all. I hope you are all well, and I will talk to you guys later.